Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about part 3 of the raid on Graymalkin, which is a mini crossover event that extends through some of the X titles. And in this case, it's issue number 9 of X-Men from the Ashes, written by Jed MacKay, and art by Ryan Stegman. But before we dive into the story, I want to ask you a favor. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a comment to help the channel grow. Now this issue opens in the sublevels of the Graymalkin prison in the former Morlock tunnels, with Psylocke having Nightcrawler at sword point. And as they sat down there, the two were at a standstill debating what their next moves should be. But just as they stood there, Nightcrawler made a very important observation, and that was if she noticed that since they left the battlefield, neither of them was experiencing the same artificial anger they felt inside. This begs the question of whether they all were dancing to the strings of someone else. And speaking of someone else, we then jumped over to the Graymalkin Control Center with the Warden and her staff overlooking the events playing out. And as they watched, the Warden stated that it was odd to see so many X-Men members in her prison but not in her cells. And to make things worse, these same X-Men members were at the doorstep of inmate X's cell. But on the other hand, the Warden was also confident that her trustees and Wolfpack Sentinels would be enough to repel the attack. Now, despite the Warden's confidence, the head guard of the prison had his objections, and then Scurvy added if he had to be in charge of controlling the trustees, then he may not be able to continue to push the X-Men's emotions. Now to their concerns, the Warden just casually stated that they are just mutants. But that was when Captain Ezra corrected her and said he had to disagree with her because they are not just regular mutants, but instead members of the X-Men. And on the next page, we have a great double-page spread of the combined teams going in on the trustees and the Wolfpack Sentinels. And let's just say, this battle was masterfully drawn, so with things going crazy in the narrow hallways of the former mansion, Cyclops let out his optic blast directly in a Wolf Sentinel's face, as he ordered Juggernaut to deal with Blob. And as for Rogue and Gambit, they too were putting in work, and just like Scott, Rogue was issuing orders out of her own for Wolverine to get Wild Child under control. And like loyal soldiers, both Kane and Wolverine did as they were told and sprung into action. So with those two doing their thing, we see mutants who were once just fighting, like Magic and Death Dream, team up and take on Siren. But that wasn't it, for we also saw people like Jubilee trying to talk sense into young upstarts like Temper while fighting shoulder to shoulder with them. Because Jubilee asks Temper if she thinks she was a little rough on Wolverine. But with Temper being a hothead, she just shot back with, spare her because she doesn't need a lecture from one of Wolverine's special girl sidekicks. Now with that cold shoulder given, we then see heroes like Gambit use this as a teachable moment for one of his upstarts like Jitter to get some combat experience. So as Wolverine and Juggernaut beat down Blob and Wild Child, on the next page, we see some of the Alaskian X-Men members like Magic and Kane getting along with the Louisiana branch members like Death Dream as they conclude their battles against Siren and Blob. And see the bonds being formed weren't just between them, but Temper also was able to let her guard down following an attack by a Wolf Sentinel to Rogue's very own ransom. And with a smile plastered on her face, she gratefully accepted his hand, and once on her feet, on the next page, we see both teams standing victorious as a unified front. And after both team leaders took inventory of who's good and who's not, we then transitioned back over to the control room. And let's just say the command structure was having a little bit of a disagreement on what they could and couldn't handle. For the captain was positive that their prison and defenses were not meant to handle 16 members of the X-Men. But the Warden didn't give a rat's ass what letter the mutants had on their suits, because she was a firm believer that the prison was strong enough to put what she called the gene trash in their proper place, and the X-Men was no different. So with all options spent, the Warden attempted to move to her trump card and ordered Scurvy to enact the White Light Protocol. Now at first Scurvy protested but was met by a thunderous slap to the face and followed up with the Warden saying he claims to be a psychic that rivals Charles, so it was time for him to prove it. Because whatever the White Light Protocol was, it was better than the X-Men freeing Inmate X in the Warden's eyes. So as the Warden plans to up the ante, we then jump back over to Psylocke and Nightcrawler still traveling through the old tunnels, and as they move we learn that along their journey the two heroes freed Omega Red and allowed him to escape. With that said, the two ended up in front of a massive vault door, and when they got there, something, or better yet someone, caught their attention. But before we could see who it was, we then jumped back to the rest of the X-Men teams interacting with each other. And as they spoke, Rogue stated that this fighting together thing reminded her of the good old days, and considering that they all are a part of the X-Men, maybe they all should start acting like it. So with both team leaders in agreement, Rogue started to recap all they accomplished by saying both Siren and Wild Child have been dealt with, and then she went on to state that their next move should be to free Charles from his cell. And right when Rogue said that, Cyclops' attitude changed instantly and he hit her with an "hell no." Now this caused Rogue to take a step back and was like, "What do you mean?" To which Scott was like, "I mean no, under no circumstances will I allow Charles to be freed." Now this hit a nerve with Rogue, because she was confused that Scott was willing to leave one of theirs behind after seeing what this place is. After all, from Rogue's perspective, this was not what mutant liberation was. But just because she thought that, didn't mean Scott agreed, because from where he stood, that was exactly what it was. Because according to him, they all were free, and then he was like, "Don't you see, Charles has always manipulated them and would continue to manipulate them for the sake of his dream. And during all of his manipulation, where exactly did it lead them all? But with him locked away, they are now all freed from Charles's dream and are now free to follow their own. And the only way this is all possible is because Charles is locked up there and they are free out here. But if Rogue lets Charles out into the world, then that would all be over and they would be back on his leash." And just as Rogue was saying this was wrong, Cyclops cut her off and stated that Charles made him watch when he murdered the crew of the Agnew back in issue number 4 of The Fall of the House of X. So as the once fragile partnership started to crack, Rogue and Scott found themselves on opposing sides of ideologies on how to move forward. 'Cause see, Rogue wasn't going to leave Charles behind, but Scott was not about to sacrifice the freedom of every mutant on the planet by freeing what he thought was one of the biggest threats to his people. In fact, when Rogue stated to step aside or she would go through him, Cyclops shot back with, "Then you'll have to kill me or have Logan do it, more likely." Because there's no coming back from this in his eyes. And just as they were about to trade blows, Scurvy came walking up and said he likes to see them all fighting each other, but none of them was going to leave Graymalkin prison. So as predicted, Logan asked who the hell he was supposed to be. To which he replied by saying, "Someone who really knows what it means to follow the dream of another at any and every cost." And he was willing to sacrifice everything he was to accomplish Ellis's dream. And then he went on to say, all this worry about Charles, and no one ever stopped to think about who could keep the world's most powerful psychic locked down, and with a burst of psionic energy, Scurvy unleashed the White Light Protocol. So as pain erupted through the X-Men heads, Kane took it upon himself to disobey Scott and rush towards the vault in an attempt to free Inmate X, and an attempt to free who they all thought was Charles. But as Kane pulled on the door, a voice came from behind him and said, "Thank you, Kane, but the effort is entirely unnecessary. Despite the name, I'm afraid Inmate X does not refer to me." And on the next page, we see Charles walking down the hallway with both Nightcrawler and Psylocke trailing behind him. And with an ominous expression on his face, Charles ended the issue by saying, "They chose to bury him deep underground as befits a dead man, but here he stands resurrected from the ashes." And with that said, this issue of X-Men comes to an end. But anyway, down in the comment section below, let me know your thoughts about this issue and what predictions you could have moving forward. So with that established, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to leave a like and a comment if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.